Alrighty, we're good to go.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us for this online Michael's Education class. My name is Nick Mikesell. I'm one of the trend and design managers here at Michael's. And happy early Halloween. I don't know about you guys. I look forward to it every year. I'm gonna enjoy it. It's my daughter's second Halloween. She's going as Wonder Woman. We're just gonna take a quick pass around the block and just enjoy it with our family. And I hope you guys do the same thing. Do me a favor, let me know where you're from in the chat. I'm in Dallas, actually just west of Dallas. That's where the Michael's headquarters are located, which is in Irving, Texas. But yeah, let me know where you're from and let me know how you're doing. I'm so happy and glad that you guys can join us today for this class. It's an advanced class, but the actual technique really isn't that difficult. It's actually pretty easy to do. And what it does, this ground that we're going to be creating on paper is going to allow you to work a little bit quicker and get more, it's going to allow you to have more detail and more dimension in your drawing. Because when one of the hardest things to do when we are working on a 2D surface is to really get that three-dimensional look, right? Because we're only working on a flat surface. But I see we have people also from Dallas. We got some people from Minneapolis joining us, Chicago. Love Chicago, one of my favorite cities to visit whenever I get a chance. St. Louis. I'm so glad you all are here to join me today. I'm excited about this. This is one of my favorite techniques to use. It's a pretty common technique, like I said. This particular, you might not, you know what? I just realized I have my overhead light on. It's going to create some weird lighting. So let me turn it off real quick. There we go. There. And now you can actually see this drawing that's right back here that I did in a Open Studio figure drawing class. That uses that particular technique. Again, it's just a ground that's created with using dry, soft pastel and also graphite dust or graphite powder. So first, before we begin, looks like I got somebody from Chula Vista. My brother lives in Chula Vista. I'm actually from San Diego. That's my hometown. So awesome to see my hometown being represented here. Anyways, so I'm going to quickly go over the materials and what we're using here and why we use it. And I won't spend too much time on that because I'm sure you're all pretty eager to see me start drawing and how to make this ground. First thing that I want to share with you in our materials is this stuff right here. It's called PanPastel. That's the brand, and it's a soft, dry pastel. And what a dry pastel is it has a lower moisture content than regular oil pastel, so it has a much finer application and much softer. I also forgot to mention that this class is being recorded. So if you want to, if I'm moving too fast or if you forget something, it's usually available on the Michael's website and YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours of the class ending. So you can go there and rewatch, pause, do whatever it is that you need to do. Back to the materials. This is number one. This is PanPastel. We sell it online at Michael's. You can pick it up. It comes in a wide variety of colors. This particular one that I have is just regular titanium white. But you can use any color. They have a colorless blender too. That'll work perfectly fine. But I'm just using white for this demonstration. I'll just leave that a little unscrewed. The next thing is what we call a lead. Have you guys seen this before? This is called a lead holder. And what it has, it's kind of like a mechanical pencil. Drafters use these. We sell them on our website. There is a link that was in the sign up. So you should be able to see it there in the materials list that you can purchase. But just as it's called, it holds lead like this. And these leads, they're about 2 millimeter lead diameter, and they come in a form like this. We sell them like this in these little tubes. They're tubes of 2 on michaels.com and in the store. And the weight that we sell is an HB weight. For those of you who are familiar with what the different pencil weights are, HB is a middle weight pencil. So it's both equally hard and equally black. That's what the H and the B stand for. So this is good lead right here. And part of the reason why we're using the lead holder and the actual leads themselves is because we're also utilizing this, which is called a lead pointer. And what the lead pointer does is it sharpens your lead in your lead holder. One of the things you'll notice, can we go to the overhead real quick? One of the things you'll notice with this, let's see if I can get it so you can see it. Okay, yeah, you see that right there where it has the sharp point and then this little hole. And then on the other side, if you see it, it's not much of a sharp point on it. It's a little bit more stubby. That's because these holes have a depth. And that depth is what you use to create that specific length. So basically, I'm pushing down on the top of my lead holder here. And as I insert it into the hole, that's the type of point that it's going to give me. So it's going to give me a sharp point when I insert my lead holder into the lead pointer, and I do a little swirl until there's not as much resistance, and that creates a nice sharp point. And there's also like this little cotton thing that they have in here. Let me hold it up a little bit higher so you can see. Yeah, this right here, that's where you use to get the dust off of the tip. You just insert your pencil in there, and it basically cleans off and makes your pencil point dust free. So when you're drawing, you're not transferring dust onto your drawing. So that's the lead pointer, that's the lead holder. And why this is completely valuable. For one thing, I love working with, when I'm drawing, I really prefer using a lead holder or any type of mechanical pencil for the main reason that they don't lose, they don't get shorter as you sharpen, right? It stays the same length. Sometimes when I'm drawing, if I need loose strokes, I'm drawing on the back, I'm holding the pencil really back so I can get those nice, long, loose strokes. So I need a long pencil for that. And that's why I prefer these metal pencils. Now, that's not to say that you can use a regular pencil like this, like these beautiful Mars Lumograph pencils. I love these pencils. They're great. But you just need to pick up a lead holder that extends the life of your pencil so that even when it gets really, really short, you can still keep it pretty long. And we sell these at Michael's too. Okay, next, let's talk about paper. Oh, wait. I forgot one important thing. Why this is so important. It's what's inside. It's the graphite powder, the graphite dust that is created. This is what I use to create my grounds. And I'm going to show you how I do that in a second. You can use graphite powders. There's even graphite lubricants, which you can use as well, that are fabulous. But I like using the stuff that I get off of here because it's more cost effective. Because sometimes those graphite powders can be a little expensive. So I've got it here. Why don't I use it?
Before we move on to the paper, Nick, we had quite a few questions in chat about the PanPastel and the significance of it. Is it better than using chalk? How does it compare?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. It is vastly superior to using like a soft pastel. I highly recommend this for this technique. I'm going to show you why in a second, but the reason why is because this stuff is a super fine powder. And that's what you want, because you don't necessarily want it to be too saturated on the paper, because basically what it does is it acts as a barrier. between the graphite and the paper so that your graphite kind of floats more on top of the paper, so it's easier to erase. And then that's the key, is when we want it to be able to erase. And I'll show you that all in a second. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. If anyone else has any more questions specifically about that, please type it in chat and I'll be sure to ask Nick.
Great. Yep, these are definitely lower moisture, not so oily, and that's what we want because they're easier to erase. If you use an oil pastel, it's hard to erase. It's going to stain your paper, it's going to seep into your paper, and it's not going to yield the type of results that we're looking for. All right, so paper. For this technique, it is important to use a good quality paper, a heavyweight paper. In this case, I have my trusty Bristol board pad. This is a 100-pound paper. It's smooth, so it's got a smoother surface. It's not as rough. It doesn't have as much of a texture. There is a little bit of a tooth on there. You can kind of feel it. And you can feel it too, the difference between both sides of the paper. The front of the paper is going to definitely be smoother than the back side. The back side is going to be a little bit more rough and have a little bit of tooth. So, but you don't want to use sketch paper. You don't want to use copy paper. Copy paper has another purpose in this technique, and I'll show you that in a second. But it's very important that you do use a better quality paper. So I've got a sheet of my 11 by 14 Bristol board. This technique also can be a little dirty, so make sure if you're working on a surface, like this is my work table, so I'm not too worried about getting it too dirty. But you know, don't use it on a surface that if you're going to be entertaining on, I wouldn't recommend using it there because the graphite can create some discoloration. And if you're using a colored pastel too, it can stain your surface as well. Another thing about the surface that you're working on, it's important that you do work on a flat surface. Don't work on something that has a heavy wood grain. You can kind of see there is a little bit of it looks like there's a wood grain texture on my table, but I assure you it's actually really smooth. It's just, it looks like that from the way that the light is hitting it. But absolutely work on your work surface, but just make sure that it's smooth. A cutting board, a nice self-heating cutting board or cutting mat is a great thing to work on. Or if you have a larger piece, or if you even have like your sketch pad, like your giant 18 by 24 sketch pad, you can put it, or it will be a great surface to work on. I see that there is a question about why do you want to use the smooth paper? And the reason why is because with this technique, we want to create an even surface, as even as possible. If you have a surface that has more tooth on it, the graphite and the PanPastel are going to catch those raised surfaces. So if I draw something here, let me just show you kind of like what I'm talking about. And I'll give you guys a close-up here of this in a second. But some papers, some of those heavier toothy papers, they have, you know, peaks and valleys, right? And as we're using the pastel and as we're using the graphite powder, that will accumulate on the high raised surfaces like that. So what it creates is it's going to create an uneven surface. And it's not going to yield the best results of what we're looking for. It's going to create too much texture. That's why we prefer using a smooth surface or a smooth Bristol. All right, good questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start out by applying my pastel. Now, I have to stand up for this technique. It's easier for me when I stand up when I do this, but to spread the pastel, you can just use a regular tissue paper. You can use a paper towel if you want. I use this. I don't use a brush. but I feel like just a regular tissue paper works perfectly fine. And all you want to do is you just need to rub it across the top of the pastel, and it starts picking that up, and then you just start applying it softly and working from the center outward to the edge of your paper. And you're going to probably have to go back, pick up a little bit more. And when you're first applying this, you can kind of feel it. And I'm not doing a lot of pressure because I don't want to push this into the paper. I just want to kind of float. And it's all because I want to be able to erase it. And if you're new to this technique, if you've never done this before, I would actually recommend that once you do one version using the pastel, and then you do another version just using the graphite dust, and you'll see the difference between the two. You'll notice that, especially when you go to erase, it's so much easier to erase when you're using the ground that has the pastel coating on it. So I want to make sure that I get a decent amount on there. I'm sure you're probably asking, how do I know when I've applied enough? And it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of doing it. And I've done this technique a lot, so I kind of get a feel for it as I'm applying the pastel onto my paper here. I can start to feel when my Kleenex is gliding more so along the surface, and there's not as much resistance. And that's when I know that I've applied enough. I'm gonna apply a little bit more.
We had a good question in chat. Will it make a difference if it's thicker in some spots?
Yes, it will, because you'll be, especially if you're using something that's tinted, like if you have a color that you're using, I mean, you'll see it, that it starts to build up more in some areas. But it will, when you go to apply the graphite powder on here, that's when it will kind of reveal itself that it's a little too heavy in that one spot. I'm about done. You can also pull it away from the side. You can kind of see how it's starting to build up along the edge. But I'm feeling pretty good now about this. And with this technique, don't rush it. You have to be patient with it. You have to take the time and you might want to also move your, once you've been scrubbing around with your tissue paper, you might want to flip it so you get a cleaner edge, because the tissue paper tends to start to break apart. So I'm right about there. I'm beginning to realize maybe I should have done a colored pastel so you could see it. Maybe if I do this class again, I'll do that. So I'm just about there. Feeling pretty good about that, the amount that I have on there. Again, this is a technique that's easy, but it does take some time to get used to, or at least a lot of practice. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to get a fresh tissue paper, and then I'm going to apply the graphite powder to this. And what I want to do is I kind of want to put a little bit of it across the paper, just like this. Now, I'm sure some of you are also probably wondering, well, how much do I know to put on here? How much graphite dust do I want to put on here? And the great thing is you can put as much or as little as you want. I mean, it all depends on how dark and the value, whether it's light or darker. You can add more, you can add less. So I put about that much on, and I usually start from the center and work my way out. And I can tell right away that I have more than enough PanPastel on there, because it's really, the graphite is moving around very smoothly. And I'm working in kind of like circular motions. I'm doing counterclockwise right now, but then after a while, I'll switch and I'll go to a clockwise and back to counterclockwise. And like I said, this technique can be kind of dirty. That's why you want to work on a working surface rather than on a surface that you want to keep clean and pristine.
So, Nick, if you
Sure.
get to this point and you realize that your priming with the PanPastel was not done evenly, is there a way to salvage it or correct it?
Yes, there is. What you can do is go ahead and finish it out and then start over. I mean, that's what I usually do. Like I said, it takes some practice. I know that's probably not the answer that some of you want to hear, but that's usually what I do is just go ahead and finish it out, finish that particular surface out, and then try another one. And you'll see that you can still work on that other surface. If it doesn't seem like you did it right, you can still work on it. It's still a little bit of a forgiving surface to work or technique to work with. So yeah, just it's again a lot of practice and trial and error. So you can see how I'm trying to make this as even as possible. You're probably going to still see some streaks in there. That's because this has gotten really saturated. As you can see, there's a lot of that dust in, or the graphite powder that's in there. So that's when you grab another fresh tissue paper and you start, and you'll see that it starts to even that back out. And like I said, you want to work slow. You want to work slowly, building it up, trying to create as much of an even tone and surface along your paper. Let's switch over. There we go. That's looking better. And I will need to clean up the bottom of my surface here because I have a lot hiding along the edge of my surface. So I'm just about there. I'm just about happy with where I've got this. There's some spots that I think like this right in here is looking pretty good. There's a little bit of blotchiness in here, but you can kind of smooth that out. And again, it's like, don't be afraid to change out your Kleenex because that will really help you to smooth things out when you have a fresh, clean one. So this is looking pretty good. I'm getting pretty happy with this. And it's okay if it kind of varies. Like if it looks a little cloudy in some spots, that's perfectly fine because we're not going to actually achieve a flat, almost like a even tone all the way across the paper. But this is looking pretty good. I'm getting pretty happy about this. And look, there's a little spot right here because I accidentally spit on it because I'm standing over the top of it. Okay, so that's pretty much the technique. I mean, that's it right there. And that's, now we've set our ground for our drawing. Let me clean the bottom of this surface here, or my work surface. You can see it kind of created this outline. I've got some handy wipes right here. This way I don't transfer anything to my drawing. You can kind of see how dirty that gets. Yeah. Let me wipe my hands. Any more questions?
We're having a little bit of a discussion here in chat.
Uh-huh.
Some people are asking what would be the point of finishing it if it won't work? And we've had some good answers. One person said, because there's no true mistakes in art.
Yes, that's a great answer. I agree with that one.
And if you can't fix it, feature it.
I like that one.
And some people were asking if they had to work along with you, and absolutely not. You can definitely just sit back and watch and learn if you'd like, and you can revisit the recording of the class later if you'd like to work along then.
Yep, yep. You sit back, relax, I'll keep going and drawing, and hopefully you'll be able to, this will be available and you'll be able to rewatch it on the on michaels.com. Okay, so this is a drawing that I already had started. I created my ground, and I found a bird that I liked online. I tend to, when I'm trying to draw nature, some of the things that I love to draw are birds, any type of animals. I love going to figure drawing and going wherever there's any open studios. I just love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And so I like to work either from live models or reference. It's okay to definitely, of course, you can work from your memory, but this particular technique that I'm doing here is best suited if we're going to be either working from a reference image or if we're going to be doing, if you're working from a live model. So this is a bird. This is an image of a little bird that I found online that I really liked. I just printed it off here at home, and I'm using this as obviously as my drawing here. On my Instagram, there is I have a time lapse of how I started this drawing, how I did the ground, and then also how I began this drawing. Because I like to, when I draw, I like to work on the whole thing at first. I don't like to start out in one small area and then work my way out. As far as when I'm starting to position my subject matter, I want to make sure that my proportions are as close and correct as possible. Again, I'm not worried if my proportions are completely out of whack, but I kind of want to get it because I want it to look somewhat similar to what it is that I'm drawing. So when I start, I'm building out larger shapes. So for example, just to go over really quickly, as I was drawing this bird, I started out by drawing actually the overall shape of the body, kind of just like this oval egg shape. And then and you'll see from that time lapse video on my Instagram that I just started drawing out shapes and blocking everything out. So the oval of the head, the triangular shape of the wings, this rectangular trapezoid almost looking parallelogram here down for the tail. And then I just started blocking in some of the details. And you can kind of see some of those finding lines. Let me hold this up so you can kind of see the detail. You can kind of see that how, like in here, where it's just like I do shapes. And then those shapes kind of interlock. And that's how I start building up from my drawing. And then I start working, and when I go in to work in the detail of this technique, that's when I zero in and I start out in one spot. Now, this surface is very delicate, so you want to be careful with it. You don't want the bottom of your hand here rubbing across it because it'll smear it. That PanPastel that's under there, like I said, it's creating a thin, very, very thin barrier between the graphite and the paper, which is making it so that graphite can be easily moved. It can be easily smeared and erased, because erasing is actually a drawing technique for us within this particular technique. What I like to do, and some of you probably already know to do this, this is where our cheap printer paper comes in very handy, because I like to put it underneath my hand as I'm drawing. This way my hand can move around, up and down, around on the paper, and that prevents everything from smearing, because that's not what we want to have happen, right? We don't want to have that. We don't want to have anything, our drawing get ruined. So that's why I protect it by putting this scrap piece of paper underneath my hand. and as I start my drawing too, what I like to do is where I started here, I like to block out and find where a lot of my highlights are, because that's what we're doing with this technique, is we're pulling out a lot of the different highlights. So that's what I kind of started doing when I first started out in the head here. Was, let me show you really closely. That, what you're looking at, all of those highlights, that's not white added in, it's not colored pencil, it's not acrylic paint, it's the white of the paper. And that's what I'm pulling out, are all those highlights. Now I got to be careful not to pull them out too quickly, because if you pull it out too quickly and you go too white too fast, then that can kind of disrupt the three-dimensional quality that we're going for. So what I like to map out is where are my highest highlights? And from what I can see here, like right here along the bottom part of the belly, and then also up here along this outside edge, there's a spot right here at this part of the wing. I take the time to really study this and plot out, where are my darkest darks, where are my lightest lights? Because my lightest lights are always going to be those highlights, those are going to be the white of the paper. So I have it here along the edge, I have it on the highlight here within the eye. And I exaggerate some of it, I do, just for the sake of the drawing, so you can kind of see here where I did a little bit more along the top edge of the beak, just to really help pull that out and really give that illusion of it curving into space. All right, so couple more things. Kneaded eraser. This is our favorite tool for this technique, because this, and I usually like to form it. I keep a kneaded eraser usually in like my left hand to keep it warm, so it's more pliable as I'm drawing. That way, when I'm ready to form it into the point when I need it, because I like using a chisel point for this technique, or also creating a kind of like a point, a cone point, because that is what will help me. And where I'm gonna start this time. And since I'm right-handed, it's important, work left to right. If you are left-handed, it is important, work right to left. That's because of, again, smearing. And it's easier when you're starting here and working your way across, rather than if I were to start down here and start working my way up. So I always work left to right as a right-handed person. Left-handed, just do the opposite. And make sure you always have this paper underneath your hand. It's important. Okay, let me bring back in our reference image so that you can see what I'm going to be talking about here. And I'm going to start along this edge, this front edge of the bird's chest. Before I do that, any questions?
We did have a couple of questions. One person was asking if we were able to do this technique with colored pencils on this ground.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, you can use colored pencils here. That's great for adding in color, and especially if you're using a colored toned background with it. Yeah, you can absolutely, you can bring colored pencils into this. As long as they're yeah, you can use that. That's not a problem.
I would definitely recommend using a higher quality colored pencil. If you use cheap ones, it'll be too waxy and probably won't work as well.
That's what I didn't want to sound too.
It makes the difference.
Yeah, I just, but yeah, of course, the quality of the materials does make a difference.
Do they erase as the same way that the graphite will erase?
It's a little bit harder, especially if you're putting a lot more pressure. If you're taking, and again, it depends on that quality of the pencil. If it's a drier, less oily colored pencil that doesn't stain the paper, it might be easier to erase and pull out. But I would probably my recommendation would be to use it lightly and practice. Like have a scrap. That's perfect. That's a perfect use for if you just create, you know, for those of you who are new to this, create your ground and practice on it. Try different materials. Try those different types of color pencils and see what happens. Start out by doing maybe a simple shape. You know, like you can look up online like a sphere and see the different lighting of a sphere and try to draw that on this ground. And use the colored pencil and see how it works. Trial and error. That's how I figure out a lot of things. Is like I'm like, well, how is this going to work? So I have scraps all around. Let's see how it does. Let's test it. All right. So we're at 35 minutes in, and I'm finally going to start drawing. So sorry about that, but please bear with me. It's a lot of information. Okay. So again, I have my kneaded eraser. I've kind of formed it into this kind of crazy point. And the reason why is because I want to create this highlight that I'm seeing right here along the chest. Now, be careful with how, when you're first applying, you need to do it softly. So what I'm doing is I'm touching the paper and pulling. And I'm pulling. I am not rubbing up and down. I'm just pressing this tip into the paper like that. And then what you have to, the beautiful thing about kneaded erasers too is that, you know, you can just knead it together and it's cleaned. So now I got a clean surface, and if I want to get more of those highlights in there, then I can go in and then I can, and I'm trying to be very careful that I don't pull out too much just yet, because again, we're using this eraser as part of my drawing tool. So I'm looking here again. I want you guys to see what I'm looking at. So hopefully you can. It's too bad just on these Zoom calls that sometimes the quality just isn't there. So you can't really see some of the texture that's happening here. You can see it back here on the back half of his cheek, but that's also happening here. And that's the nice thing with this technique too, is I can capture some of that texture, because I'm drawing with this eraser and creating, and I could do a few little strokes with that edge. And let me show you. Let me get up here and show you, because I use the chiseled edge on my trusty eraser, and you kind of see that. Can you all see that, where it acts like it's creating like strokes in there to mimic the feathers? So this is what I love. This is what I absolutely love about this technique, is because it makes me faster and quicker as an artist, especially when I'm in my figure drawing classes, and I can create form much faster than I would if I was just going on just regular white paper. You could also use in this technique let's say, maybe somebody asked a question about it, but what happens if I do pull out too much too fast? That's when your trusty blending stick comes in handy. These things are great for that, because what you can do is, if you have your scrap, I'm just going to do it off to the side. You can pull up some of that graphite onto the tip of your blending stick, and then you can put that back in. So you see, and I'll show you. So if I went too far, I can just use my blending stick to get it back. See? Ta-da! And then I can pull, if I want to get sharper, I love using erasers as drawing tools. If I want to get a sharper, like really get, like for right here, for instance, like you can see right, this part right here along this part of the wing. I want something to be a little bit sharper there, because if you guys see this value-wise, if we look at this value-wise, of course, this blue part of the wing is much darker than here, and creates that edge right there. So that's where these two values meet. This lighter value of those lighter feathers and then this darker value of these bluer feathers. And to capture that, the tricky part is, of course, we're working in black and white, and this is a color image. But so if I want to get something a little bit, first let's use this guy again. Go back to our kneaded eraser. Let's pull out some more of that highlight, just pushing it in and pulling it up, cleaning it off to make a different edge. Because if you notice when you're doing this kind of push and release technique with the kneaded eraser, if it stops creating any lightness or pulling up any graphite, that's when you got to clean it and move it and reposition it. So getting there again. Let's pull out some across the body here. Go back up.
Is there a particular reason you chose the kneaded eraser? Can you use a typical type of eraser or a mechanical eraser?
You can use, I do have one here in my hand. I do have my click eraser. I have two different types of click erasers here. I have one that's more narrow diameter, and I have one that's more of a thicker diameter. You can get these standard click erasers. There's a link on the class page where you can pick one of these up. They just found them everywhere. You can use these for pulling out definite sharper highlights, because when you use these types of erasers, they're going to pull out way more of the graphite. You have to have a kneaded eraser when using this technique because it allows you more control in how much of the graphite and the PanPastel that you're pulling out to create your highlights. So we're kind of working reversely here because we already have the tone, we already have the value, and now I'm just making it lighter. So usually when you're drawing on a white paper with your pencils, you're adding value onto it. Here we're subtracting value, for me, it just makes things so much quicker. So that's a great question, but yes, I would definitely recommend using these different tools in tandem with each other. So let me show you what I do with my click eraser. So this is my narrow one. You'll notice that I have a chisel point on it, right? Can you see that? There's a bit of a chisel on it. And what I did was I took my X-Acto blade and I create that chisel point because I really do need that chisel. Let me cut it off again. So again, I created that chisel point, and the reason why is because that then becomes a drawing tool for me, and I can use that. Let me show you. I'm going to use it right here across that edge where the blue part of the wing meets those white feathers. So I can just use it like I'm drawing. And I'm adding a little bit more pressure, and I'm pulling out more of that graphite in there. And I'm just using it like I would a drawing tool. And I'll give you guys a close up here in a second so you can use it, or you guys can see it. So there. So the white of the paper starts coming out. You guys see that? Right there. So
yes, it shows up very well on the camera.
What's that?
It shows up very well whenever you hold it up.
Perfect, perfect. I'll keep doing that. So now let's talk about adding value back in, because I've shown you basically how the erasers work. I use them together, and I'm gonna start drawing out what right here, this part, right underneath there, where it looks like these neck feathers are right here, go over and the top of the top of the bird wing. You see how it kind of overlaps in there? Let me show you how to do that. First thing first that I'm going to do is I got these are beautiful pencils, and they're called Mars Lumograph Blacks. Hold it up there. And these pencils are probably some of my favorite pencils, along with Tombow pencils, but these are fantastic. This particular one is a 4B. I also have a 6B here that I'm using today, or wait, no, is that an 8B? My apologies, that's an 8B that I'm using. Why I love these pencils so much is because they have a low glare quality. One thing you'll notice, and using my HB lead pointer lead, they're very shiny. So when you see that, like if you ever try to take a photo of your drawing from your camera, from your phone on your camera or anything, you always see there's like a shine. There's always like a glare, right? These have a very low glare quality that I absolutely love. So it makes it easier to photograph for one thing, but then also there's they're a little bit drier than some standard pencils. And so they have a great tooth to them. So you can really feel it tug as you're drawing with it. You can really feel it grab the paper. I don't know about you guys, but that is one of my favorite things, is feeling the pencil just grab the paper and kind of create that scratchy mark. It's something, I work a lot in the computer too. And that's just something that I cannot recreate when I'm drawing either on my tablet or on my Cintiq. So I just, this is where my heart is, of course, is within drawing on regular paper. I love doing digital art. It has a different quality. I mean, it has its place for what I do at work because it's quicker and faster and more forgiving. But the drawing, painting from, using oil paints, using graphite and pencils, this is where my heart will always be. So I'm just drawing in and laying in some values. If you notice my technique, what I do is I do short strokes for and cross hatching. So short stroke cross hatching, just layering them over each other in order to build up my values slowly. I vary my pressure too. So I'll, have a firmer pressure. Sometimes, it depends on my mood. Where are all my fellow artists at? Raise your hands, because if you're anything like me, the way you draw or paint that day depends on your mood. I mean, if I've had a bad day at work, I might be a little bit more crazy with my strokes, but if I'm happy, if I'm feeling in love, then I feel like I'm a little bit more tender in my strokes. But depending on my mood, depending on what's happening that day, I'll either be drawing really fast or really slow. We've got about 12 minutes left, so I just want to keep showing you how I work here in this. And for some darker lines, like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but in here, there are, along the edge, there are some darker, sharper lines. That's where you can bring in more pressure. So on the bottom here of the wing and create those darker lines. Keeping your pencil sharp is important. I have a fun electric standing pencil sharpener that I prefer to use for when I sharpen my pencils. I don't use the little hand ones because those can be, for beginning artists, those are perfectly fine, but for more advanced artists, I like to create these long points. You've probably also seen it, or you probably do yourself, where you take your X-Acto blade and you shave away a lot of the wood and expose that lead, and then you create that long crazy point. Have you guys ever seen artists do that? I do that sometimes. Excuse me. Sometimes I just don't have the patience sometimes for it because I want to get into drawing. So this is my favorite pencil sharpener. It's a standing one. I like this. You'll see like there's some where you push in from the front, like it sits on your table and you push in from your front. I like these standing ones because I like the fact that I can push down into it and it doesn't go pushing back. Like, you know what I mean? The pencil sharpener doesn't push away from me if it's standing in front of me. So let me go back to my drawing. I'm actually going to grab my 8B because I need a little bit more of a darker value underneath the wing here. And I'll show you really quickly how to do a quick eye too with the time that we have. We have about 10 minutes. Are there any questions, Maddie?
No questions at the moment. Some people were asking about future classes with you teaching, and I was just about to explain that we don't have any scheduled quite yet, but we're in the works of maybe getting some going for January of next year.
Yep, yep. With the holidays around the corner, you know, I like taking time off too to spend with my family, but we'll see. There potentially could be some more earlier than January. We'll see.
And you have done some past classes where we have the recordings of those up on michaels.com/classes under the fine art section, and on our YouTube channel. You've done a drawing 101 class and a repeat of this class, I believe.
Yep. Yep, I have. This is the second time that I'm doing this class. I've done the introduction to drawing class, I think 3 times now. And I did a kids club class last week. That was a lot of fun. I drew a zombie dog. It was awesome. So I'm going to show you this real quick. I'm making a really, really fine point because right along the top here, edge, I want to kind of pull out some finer details of that feather. So, or those little tiny fine feathers. So I am kind of dragging and pushing and pulling a little bit to kind of pull out some more of that graphite on there. And then I'm going to take where's my click eraser with the chiseled point, and hopefully this will work. And like I said, if it's not doing what I really want it to do, it's when I can take my wonderful blending stick and kind of pull back in. Yeah, that'll help. So I want to create these fine little marks. I go through a lot of click erasers because I'm constantly doing this to clean them. Like a click eraser refill. Where is my Exacto blade? Because I'm constantly, this is how I clean them, is that I just go and cut off the tip. And you got to be careful because I'm doing this on top of a drawing when I should have a little cutting board close to me so that I'm not destroying my surface. Let's see if that'll help.
People were asking if you can clean your blending stick using that same method.
Of doing with the Exacto blade?
Yes.
Yeah, you can use that, and then also fine grit sandpaper. That always works well for me. So let me go back in here and add some more drawing strokes, and then I will demonstrate how to make an eye real quick. Micah, what I did there, because I did that really fast. And then I'll show you guys what I've been doing here. And I like to take my time. You know, I don't like to rush too much through my drawings. So let me show you real close here. Pull this up so you can kind of see what's happening. So you see how that looks? It gives that illusion like the wing is tucking in underneath these feathers, these fine feathers right here. And it looks so that really gives that illusion of overlap. And this is a flat surface. And that's why I love this technique, because it helps you to achieve that. You see how, and of course, this is all about form shadow sequence. And it's all about light. Maybe one day I'll have a class on how light affects the surfaces of the objects that you're drawing. But let me demonstrate really quickly again how to draw an eye. And I'm just going to kind of work with this eye that I have here. And I got my HB lead mechanical pencil here to kind of help me block out the overall shape. I'm not really using this to draw. I'm just using this to kind of help me block out the shape of this eye. As you can see, I mean, of course, it's primarily circular, right? But it does have quite a little bit of a hexagon type of feel that's going in there. And I might use a little bit of strokes to create some preliminary values. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure I get through this and show you how quickly this technique works. I'm going to block out where that highlight is right there, so I know that tells me not to draw there. I'm going to lay down some foundation value with my HB pencil, like so. And then I'm going to take my 4B, and I'm going to add more pressure. I'm going to start building out some of these darker values. Add more of a darker value to the eye. Now, if you guys ever look at eyes, right, and we've all seen an eye in our time, you have your iris and you have your retina. The retina is the dark thing. That's the opening to the back of the eye. That's where your darkest dark is going to be. Since this is completely dark, I am going to take artistic license, and I am not going to make the whole thing dark, because if you make the whole thing dark, it will flatten out. Sometimes we just have to, sometimes we need to combine drawing from memory along with what we're looking at in order for the sake of the artwork itself. So let me keep going. It is getting hot in this room. Ooh, I feel myself sweating. All right. So I've kind of drawn it in. If you guys, some of you might have noticed that I just started drawing and I haven't even started with my eraser yet, because I kind of wanted to block some of this out first, some of these preliminary values. Now I'm going to bring my kneaded eraser in. I'm going to push in and remove some of that value there. And then I can even go in and use my chiseled click eraser and start erasing some along the bottom part of this eye, or the eyelid. Let me pull some out right here. Right there. How are we doing on time, Maddie?
We have just a few minutes left. It's fine if we go over a couple of minutes. It's not a problem. And
Okay.
I was curious, if people wanted to share their work with you, where can they find you?
I am on Instagram. Let me show you guys this real quick. And I'll show you what my handle is on Instagram. But let me finish this off so you guys can see. And this is what I love about this technique. Look how long that took me to do that. I mean, it didn't take me that long at all to get a really nice dimensional eye in there. And if I were to take my time like I was doing to finish off this entire drawing, and I'll finish it off and I'll put it up on my Instagram. But my Instagram, if you guys want to follow me or share with me your artwork that you've done using this technique, or any of your artwork for that matter that you have done using Michael's products or anything with Michael's, this is where you can find me on Instagram. It's at Nick_Mikesell, all lowercase. Please do share what you have, what you're drawn. You can share it with us here at Michael's using the hashtag #MakeItWithMichaels. So we can see what you guys are up to. Sometimes we like to feature some really cool artwork in our email blasts that we get from some of our makers. But I just really love to see who's been doing what whenever I look up this hashtag to see what you guys have done. So please do share it with us, because we definitely want to see it. And like I said, I'll finish this drawing off. I will get it up on Instagram so you can see how it looks when it's all done. Again, my name is Nick Mikesel. I really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day, this hour, to join me and do this drawing technique. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did too. I hope I see you again soon in another future class. Be safe this Halloween, and thanks again. Thanks for your time. Bye, everybody.